Okay, so I realized last night, before we get started, that either last night or this is my 300th Mishlei shiur. So I was very happy that and expressing gratitude, to Hashem that I can teach Mishlei 5 times a week. That's a dream job. And I say I'm not sure if it's this year or the other one because I think there were a couple of recordings that I split into 2. This is like episode 302. So I think we're in the realm of this is the 300th shiur. So I want to share something that I said. This is a sneak peek for tomorrow's Stoju podcast, which is relevant to Mishlei, which I also shared last night in my Mishlei shiur. So Seneca in letter 71 says, wool takes, you could probably tell me about this. Wool takes on certain colors at once, while others it will not absorb unless it has been repeatedly soaked in them and boiled. In the same way, there are other systems of thought that our minds, once they have understood them, can immediately put into practice. But the system of which I am speaking, unless it goes deep and sits for a long time and has not just tinged the mind but dyed it, does not fulfill its promises. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and guess, even though I'm not a wool dyeing expert, that black is probably easier to dye than other colors. Okay, fine. All right. So let's assume that. Let's assume that if you take white wool and you dip it in black ink. Okay, and I know that's not how you do dye wool. Then the colors are gonna stick. But I know if it's like red or something like that, you need to do. Oh, it doesn't? All right, fine. So whatever.
Composition of the dye.
Okay. All right. So whatever it is, fill in the details, right? We can all imagine it, right? So certain things you need to do many, many times. So what he's talking about stoicism, obviously. And he's saying that you can't just take it and then apply it. You need to steep yourself in it through constant review and practice in order for it to affect you. And he says that stoicism does not fulfill its promises unless you do this. Okay. Mishlei partakes of both categories because Mishlei does have ideas that you could immediately put into practice, but there's also a Mishleic way of thinking that you really only get after being immersed in pasuk after pasuk and idea after idea for a long period of time, and then it really affects your thinking after that. So you do get benefit from Mishlei from learning it here and there, but I think the real benefit comes from the constant immersion, and that's why I'm associating this to the fact that this is a 300th shiur, that, there were periods in my life where I only learned Mishlei once a week, and let's say this is more of a maxed out thing where I'm learning it 5 times a week, sometimes 6, and I think I used to think of that just as a quantitative difference, that 5 is 5 times better than 1, but there's also a qualitative difference of we've talked about this before, of the daily involvement in Mishlei, and especially starting off your day with Mishlei. It really will affect your thinking in different ways and allow you to develop a Mishleic intuition to be able to think like Shlomo wants you to think, as opposed to just applying Shlomo Melech's wisdom. And that's the difference between a Mishlei Chacham and a Mishlei Navon. A Mishlei Chacham is a dependent learner of Mishlei and is dependent on receiving particular ideas, which he then applies in the parameters that they are presented in. A Mishlei Navon is a creative thinker or an independent thinker where you can think Mishleically beyond what Shlomo teaches you. So, yeah. So that's the first Mishlei idea of the day. Okay. Oops. Any questions on that before we get back to our pasuk? Okay, so yeah.
In the analogy, it's like dipping the wool into the dye.
Yeah.
Would it be the same color each time as it is doing Chazara with the same material, or is it just staying on the same topic for a long time? 300 shiur Mishlei, but you haven't gone through each thing 300 times.
Right. So Chazara would have a benefit as well, both intellectually and emotionally. Intellectually, because you'll see new things. And for that, I guess listen to the Migdal shiur I gave, the 2 Migdal shiurim on methodology that I gave last summer in the summer program, because it was on. I'm kind of happy about this move. I don't know, was anyone there? No. Okay, so I gave a shiur on Rav Yitzchak Kampanton's methodology sefer. And the opening of the book talks about how you should review something even 100 times. So I gave that 1 week. What was that? Yeah, it's from the Gemara, right? So he goes in and explains that Gemara. And then the next week, I gave the exact same shiur again. Because if we're really going to take him seriously, that I should give the exact same shiur again. And lo and behold, we got new ideas and got further depth and all this other stuff. So that's intellectually. And then emotionally, then the way Rabbi Moskowitz used to say it is that the mind only needs to see an idea once in order for it to understand it. So let's say like you're learning something in math, right? Like a pure abstract discipline. So you see it once and then your mind gets it. Once it's clear, right? But books like Mishlei and Tehillim and Pirkei Avos and Mitzvos, then you need to see multiple times because your emotions need repetition and you need to see it from slightly different angles to be affected by it. And so that's why there's a benefit in reviewing it, for the emotions as well. And by reviewing not just the same idea, but also the same idea from different angles. Yeah, Isaac?
So why is it the case that the emotions can't just like grasp something immediately?
I don't know. That might be a question about psychology. That's how the emotions work. I know that's not an answer, but it seems to be like the nature of the psyche that it needs repetition. There's also an ego dimension involved, which is that there's such a tendency when you're learning about practical stuff to be like, oh yeah, this doesn't apply to me, or like I'm the exception.
Or I already know it.
Or I already know it, right? Yeah, but if you knew it, then you wouldn't make this mistake again and again and again. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. Yeah. Okay. Shall we? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So okay. So 22:7. Ashir birashim yimshol ve'eved lo ve'ish malveh. A rich man will rule over poor people, and a borrower is a servant to a lender, or to a man who is a lender. Okay, fine. And Sadigon just said, just as a wealthy person makes himself rule over poor people, so too it is proper or befitting for the borrower to be like a servant to the lender. Why did I write the word socioeconomic?
I have no idea.
Oh, I know why. It was very, very late at night. I can't function after 9 p.m. And I was trying to type out the Mishlei blurb or something like that for another shiur. And I could not spell socioeconomic, so I had to type it out on something that had spell check, and I accidentally saved it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the questions and problems are very few relatively. Is this pasuk descriptive or prescriptive? So is it describing what actually is the case, or is it like Sadigon said, where he should? Well, yeah, it is befitting for someone to do this. You should do this. All right. Either way, what's the practical idea? If it's descriptive, is this really true? Does a rich person rule over poor people, and is the borrower a servant of the lender? If it's prescriptive, then why should this be the case? Like, what is it telling you to do, or why is it telling you to do it? Two, granted that this is referring to money, which we said, everyone, not everyone, several people yesterday immediately leapt into, Ezu Ashir Hasamech B'Chalka. I know you have your idea. This is not a criticism, but Ezu Ashir Hasamech B'Chalka, or maybe this is talking about knowledge. So that's fine and dandy, but you're gonna have a hard time with borrowing and lending, okay? Or maybe you won't. But so I'm saying, so what I wanted to say, was it? Okay, so what I wanted to say is that this has to at least refer to literal money. Okay, now you can definitely take it metaphorically in the derech nistar, but just realize that there is a literal level. Okay, 3, what's the relationship between the two halves? Both according to Pshat and according to Sadiq. 4, in what sense does the Ashir rule over the Rashim? And in what sense is the Lova a servant to the Malveh? Who is the audience of the pasuk? Is it the rich/lender, or is it the poor/borrower, or is it someone else? And then 6, what's the Havamina? Okay, so quick review of the ideas we had yesterday. This is not in order, and you'll have to fill in the gaps here. One was that, it's talking to these are both two mistakes, right? That a person is, or biases that a person is inclined to make. Hear the dumb way mnemonic device I had for this. Because of Rav Pesach shiur on Sunday, I was thinking you have to destroy both biases. You have to have a Churban bias Rishon and a Churban bias Sheni. That's how I associated to it. But yeah, so the bias here is now you're never gonna be able to get that out of your head. I'm sorry. Yeah, that the person who's poor, because he's in a dependent relationship to the person who's rich, or because he's on a different socioeconomic level, is going to feel inferior, and that's going to cloud like his decision making and his identity and self-evaluation. Similarly with the borrower and the lender, he's going to feel like a servant. In reality, though, like we saw earlier in the parak, Hashem makes the poor and the rich. There's no intrinsic differences between you and someone who's richer or poorer than you. You're both human beings. You just happen to have different resources. And you're not a slave to the guy yet. You're dependent on him in a certain sense, but it's a financial arrangement, and he's dependent on you in a certain sense, because really, in a certain way, you hold sway over him. You got his money, and he has to come after you to get it. Like, look at landlord stuff in New York, right? It's really hard to kick a tenant out of the apartment. So who's the real master? I mean, right? Yeah, yeah, Isaac.
I have a thought about how to interpret this pasuk as Sameach b'chalko.
Okay, let's just finish reviewing first.
Yeah.
We had. Did you have an idea yesterday? No.
I did. We didn't like it. Your intuition didn't like it.
Okay, my intuition. Let's say what it was again.
Okay.
Maybe my
Talking
intuition is
to a
different.
third party, and then my
Yeah. Oh, when you're dealing, yeah, I'll say it and you'll fill in. All right, okay. So when you are interacting with someone who is poor, and you were saying specifically poor or rich.
I saw it easier with poor.
Right. Okay, so it could be both, right?
Yeah.
You have to realize that person's psyche is limited and restricted and somewhat defined by his socioeconomic state. We actually had this idea earlier in the year, I think it was a puzzle about how rich people are more brazen than poor people, and poor people tend to be more subservient than rich people, which is connected to this, that you have to factor their psyche into the picture when you're dealing with them and realize, like, yeah, you are not in that state. So it might be easy for you to just go and why don't you just get a job? Or like, why don't you just go and like donate money, but like the psychology of the rich person or the psychology of the poor person is different. Again, I forgot if I recommended this year, listening to this podcast that I've been obsessed with lately. I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, which is a podcast of, he has, what was it? So he wrote a book. He gives financial advice to couples, but the chiddush of the podcast is that they fully disclose all their finances to him. And it's kind of a combination of like couples therapy, but also like psychology of money. And you see from this that people who are extremely rich can still be insane about like money, in terms of like not being able to spend money. And then people who are, so he really deals with like the psychology of money. And you really see that there's no difference between poor and rich people, in the sense that all people can think stupidly and insanely about money. And like his whole thing is like trying to like address that,
So what's the smart and non-insane way to incorporate money?
Listen to the podcast. But, yeah, no, but this is the thing. Like he says, like, he used to think that you could just like show people their finances and then they'll like wake up and realize like, oh, I'm making stupid mistakes, but you have to like meet them where they're at psychologically. And the only reason I didn't like it is not because of the idea, but because it's not intuitive to me that Mishlei is talking to someone who's not in the pasuk, given the very, very like, rigid way that the pasuk is like, spelling it out. Now, many pasukim do talk to people who are not in the pasuk, but just here, my intuition wasn't going with it. And was there another idea? Yeah, Ellie?
Oh, yeah. So that it is really a message to the poor person and the borrower, in that they're already being supplied by people above them.
Right.
So
right.
They shouldn't like take advantage.
Right. So in other words, it's saying to the poor person and to the borrower, recognize that there is a ruler over you, which not primarily, primarily in the sense that like tier one level, it's the guy who you're dependent on and the guy who's like lending to you. Tier 2 is Hashem, that we're all only borrowing money from Hashem, right. In the sense that like it's not actually ours, and that's how Chazal say that you should think about it. Yeah.
And I guess if in terms of the first half, if it's taking place in like a Jewish society, yeah, then the rich man will be supplying to the poor in terms of serving. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you can't let that. You can't. It's weird. It's weird that it's saying that there's a certain ego trap you can fall into as the poor person or as the borrower, and think that you are, you weren't even here yesterday. That's why you didn't have an idea. Okay, yeah. I was still thinking back to the idea. And you know why? Because I quoted you last night's shiur. I quoted your idea from last week on Hierarchical, so that's why it was in my mind.
that there's an ego trap that you can fall into even as the poor or dependent person. And I think I mentioned yesterday, Bnei Israel fell into this when they were dependent on Hashem in the midbar a lot. They were totally dependent, and yet the ego got the better of them there. Okay, now Isaac, you have an idea, but Chaim was like chomping at the bit.
There's also one more idea from yesterday.
Yeah, what was it?
That I said that's contrasting the Usher Rush dynamic with the Lovim Alpha dynamic, because the Rush is constantly dependent on the Usher,
right?
Whereas the Lova doesn't actually have the same sort of thing.
Right. It's a temporary arrangement with the Malva and Lova, whereas with the Rush and the Ashir, then it's more of a permanent thing. Yeah. Okay. So Chaim is up first, and then Isaac has an idea after that. Yeah, Chaim.
Okay. So okay. I'll admit it works better with Sajigo.
Okay.
I'm okay doing that.
So is he.
So I want to say that in both halves of the pasuk, it's talking about the relationship between the intellect and the emotions.
Okay.
And
Which direction are you going to take? Which one's the intellect?
both the lender and the
okay, fine. Okay. All right.
And the usher and the lender, both the intellect.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if it's just showing two different ways of interacting with how the two interact and how they should interact.
Yeah.
But basically, the wealthy person, i.e., the intellect, makes himself rule over the poor people, i.e., the emotions.
Oh, that's why I was asking.
Oh.
Which one is the intellect and which one's the emotions?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the wealthy person is the intellect.
Yeah.
And the lender is the intellect as well.
Okay.
In the second half.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that makes me say that is because, well, like Chachma would make you wealthy in this sense, like in
Okay.
the Semitic sense, but also because it's one versus many.
Mhm.
So like there's the intellect versus the many emotions.
Okay.
Um,
we didn't notice that yesterday, right? That it's plural for poor people. Yeah.
and then especially because he says it's proper or befitting for the borrower to be like a servant to the lender.
Yeah.
So that's more of saying the borrower as, you can call it like the physical body, or like that may be like a more of like a mind body kind of thing, which actually might work better now that I think about it. And that the lender is, I guess, the thing which ultimately there's something between the two that goes back to it.
Yeah.
That would be like after death, it's just the mind. Like the intellect, call it, would go back to or be released from the borrower. And it's proper for the borrower to be subservient to the lender. So the body, the emotions to be subservient to the intellect.
Okay. So do you have a that's very creative. Okay. Do you have a practical application for us?
It would be very broad. Just that you should think your emotions work in line with your intellect.
Okay, so I would say that's where we need to work on in order to develop the idea. Very interesting. And let me just ask Isaac, if your idea is at all similar to that, then I'll hear it now. But if not, you triggered something in me, which I'll state. Yeah.
I haven't thought about it, but it's the opposite.
Me too. Why don't you go first? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That the emotions are like an usher or a Malva, because they're extremely powerful and typically have control.
Yeah. Right.
Okay,
you know who agrees with you?
You.
No. Well, not me too, but beyond just me. More authoritative than me. More than the Meiri.
More than the Meiri.
No, most authoritative one ever.
Wait.
Shlomo HaMelech. Okay, yeah, and I think we've talked about this before, that the Meiri's approach to the derech nistar utilizes certain metaphors that Shlomo developed that are like go-to allegories, and one of them is the tale of the poor chacham and the rich old king. And so we did do this earlier in the year, yeah. So just to reference it again, So I think this is the first place he says it in Koheles 4:13. Tov Yeled miskin v'chacham mimelech zachin uksiel asher lo yada hizahir od. Better a poor but wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knows how to protect himself. Ki mi beis asurim yatalim loch. The poor chacham emerged from the prison to rule. Even though in his kingship he was born poor. That's one place where he says it, and I think this is where Rashi explains why. I think it's what Isaac said, but let me just see if Rashi quotes it here. Yeah, Tov Yelem Miskin V'Chacham Zeh Yetzer Tov. So that's the intellect, the drive of the intellect. Lama Nikra Yeled. Why is it called young? She'enu Ba'adam Ad Yugam Lashana, because you don't get a Yetzer Tov developed until you're 13, right? Your intellect really comes online at 13. Miskin, and why is he poor? She'en Ha'evarim Shomim Lo Kamo Liyetzer Hara. The limbs, the body doesn't listen to it like it listens to the Yetzer Hara. And Chacham is Shemaskil as Adam B'derech Tova. It intelligently guides a person on the good path. And then Melech Zaki and Uksiel, a old and foolish king, Yetzer Hara, Shehu Shalit Al Kol Ha'evarim. The king rules over all of the limbs. And then Zakin, he's old. Sha'a Shanolad Havlad Hunasan Ba. Once the child is born, then it is the Yetzer Hara develops. That's we paskin according to Marcus Aurelius, right? If you hold that Antoninus is Marcus Aurelius, there's a machlokes between Antoninus and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi about when the Yetzer Hara comes into the person. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said it was in the womb, and Marcus Aurelius says it's when he's born. And then Yehuda Nasi says, there's a good raya from Bereshit that says the chatas crouches at the opening, meaning like once you're born, then it goes into you, and then it's a seal. Shematehu l'derech ra, that it inclines you on the evil path. And this mashal comes up a lot in Koheles, so like there's more to it. So now let's take that and develop it. So what would the idea be there if, let's just plug it in. So the rich person, I don't know why it's plural, okay, but whatever. That part doesn't work out as well as yours, but the Yetzer Hara rules over the intellect, or will rule over the intellect. And let's say that the love is also the intellect, right? The borrower is a servant to the lender, which is the emotions. So can we get an idea out of that? I have one.
Then it can be like an advice, well, not an advice, but a warning pasuk.
Okay.
Like, hey, this is your natural inclination, and
Yeah,
this is what you should look out for.
Okay. So one way to take it is that it is describing the default state of things, or the way that things will go if you don't change things, right? And why would the pasuk need to say that? I mean, the same question I would ask on you, which is that this seems like a very, very like basic Mishlei premise, right?
Because it's kind of similar to what we were saying before. There'd be this like psychological drive that the usher is. I think it's similar to what Mario was saying yesterday. We're like,
yeah,
the usher or the adi, well, or the whatever.
Yeah.
Poor person.
Yeah.
Slash lender has. Well, I guess the poor person really more so has this like natural state of like, this guy's gonna always be over me, and I can never like get the better of him. But I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyone else have an idea with this? So I was thinking maybe it's saying that that you have to be aware that there is a certain rulership that the emotions have over you, and that the intellect is indebted to, which is that you cannot just ignore your psyche. Like your psyche. And when I say psyche, by the way, like in the Meiri medieval framework, psyche and body, like it's talking about like the physical aspect of you, so instinctual and like higher psychological stuff, whatever. So like there's a big mistake people make when they underestimate the power of the emotions, and also the fact that you do need to like heed your emotions and your bodily needs in a way that obviously not where you just abandon yourself to them, but like let's say you try to just like what's the lo nistar Torah l'malachei hasharis? The Torah was not given to angels, right? So, but there's this fantasy that because you identify with your intellect, then you can just like, I don't need like, I can just go and rule, like that's like a kid who's poor thinking that he's the king when there's actually a king there. No, there is a rulership destination, but you need to work your way up intelligently and not just like ignore the fact that they're currently ruling over you. Like this is the starting off point of dependency and you're being ruled as an intellect, and you need to like work with that and see. I gotta see if the Meiri is going to say this, but
who's the borrower lender in this?
So the borrower lender is more difficult, right? The Evid part makes a lot of sense. I think so here's what I would be tempted to say. Anyone want to say? What's the mashal borrower and lender?
That your intellect does have those times where it is able to say do some ruling. but those are not like forever times.
Okay, so that's like borrowing the temporary arrangement thing, like from Isaac. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say that there's times where the emotions give the intellect control because like in order to construct something that's in line with what the emotions want. Like let's say like when you're having an argument with someone, like you're like, you're able to be very rational about it, but
Yeah,
only in the way that your emotions want you to.
right. Okay, I hear that also.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
and
go
then-
on yeah.
And just in those circumstances, your intellect is like an eved to the
Okay, so I have a slightly different take. I think it's a little bit more basic, but you are reliant on your let's say like you need to eat, you need to sleep, you need and it's really the emotion saying, okay, like I'm gonna give you what you need, intellect, but there is a dependency relationship on that. You can't just escape those needs. And therefore the first half of the pasuk would be talking about the influence they exert on your decision making. The second half would be talking about how you're actually dependent on the body and the psyche.
So I probably because since I had the idea, I'm drawn to Sadigo's translation here.
Yeah.
Do you think that this idea could work within him as well? I mean, I think
Yeah. So that works out much better
for
for you. Yeah.
Right. No, but I think.
Sorry. It works out better for me
I think
too.
the second half would work very well.
Yeah.
Meaning it's proper to have the mindset that like, well, I don't know if it's either that you have the mindset that your psyche is, sorry, I don't know, I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay. All right. Isaac, sorry, yeah, Sean.
I took it away.
Want to give a separate approach.
Okay, so let's go. Isaac, did you have a separate nistar approach, or was that the nistar approach you had?
No, I had a separate nistar approach.
Okay, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I really just have something for the first half.
Okay.
Which is someone who's a shiur, which is someone who is happy with what he has, rules over someone who isn't happy with what he has.
Okay.
Because the other guy is dependent on a lot of external things for his happiness.
Yeah.
And the shiur isn't. So so he can so it gives him a lot more like power and autonomy relative to
Okay, that's really good.
Rush.
Now the question is the lender and the borrower, right?
I think I have.
Okay, go ahead.
So I actually want to split this into 3 people, which I don't think has been done. Which is that it was.
Yeah.
All right.
But third person was an outsider, but
Well, no, but like the pasuk is talking about 3 people because you have the shiur, you have the borrower, and then you have the lender. Right. Lender does not necessarily mean that he's the rich person.
Okay, right. That's
Because you
true.
can for sure have a rich person who does not lend out the money.
Okay, right.
Right. So I'll start with the second half and then I'll bring it back to the first half, which is that right when you are a borrower, whenever you take on responsibilities or a obligation to something, you carry that obligation with it. Meaning that if I have a responsibility towards something or towards someone, so then that I always need to keep that responsibility in mind, right? Which is going to limit the amount of options that I can take in terms of doing certain things or taking certain directions, right? Versus a person who is a rich person, so to say, who's not dependent or does not have to pay back anybody or is not forced to do anything because of certain constraints, has a certain freedom that a borrower will not, and as a result will be able to forge and pave paths that a person who's borrowing cannot.
Okay.
And in that sense, he's going to be a leader or a ruler because he is, in a sense, choosing new directions that are not possible for other people, and that's what's going to be opening up the horizon, not the person who is constrained by whatever factors.
Okay. Yeah. And hold on a second. Did I miss? So hold on a second. So then what's the difference between the poor person and the borrower? Or no, that's the same. That's the same thing, right? So I feel like I only got I got the distinction that the lender is not necessarily rich, but what's the idea that emerges from? And I get that the rich person has more options, and that's the sense that he's ruling. But what is the idea for the lender?
I think a lot of people think that yes, I made this obligation or whatnot, but no, I can still do this thing, right? And they don't keep in mind their responsibilities and their obligations, and then they try and do something, and then whatever obligations that they hadn't worked out, hold them back and prevent them from actually being able to be successful. And so a lot of times I think people do not take into considerations the things that their responsible towards,
Mhm.
and that causes them to not be able to accomplish that.
Okay, so then the three levels are divisions within within restrictedness by your obligations, so you could put it.
Yeah.
Like, so the rich person is unrestricted, the borrower is the lender is restricted by the that relationship of the lending, and then the
Well, the lender is not necessarily, let's say you have a person who has a bunch of money and they
Yeah.
don't need that money. So
Right.
then he's not going to be constrained by giving away
Yeah.
that money. Right.
Correct.
You could have a scenario where a lender is constrained by giving away money.
right. So I feel like I feel like I'm missing a critical piece of your idea because it's not clicking. Can I like I'm not seeing, so what's the idea of the I see very clearly in the first half of the pasuk. I don't see in the second half of the pasuk. Or I'm missing the first half because it's related to the second half.
Okay, so I think that, so a borrower being a servant to the man who is a lender,
Yeah,
right, that relationship is formed when you have certain obligations, you become subservient both to that person
yeah,
and just in general, you cannot do the same, you don't have the same amount of liberty because now you have this responsibility towards this person.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lack of independence.
yeah,
Versus the rich man who has that independence.
right.
Right. And that's going to express itself in a number of ways. A rich person does not have to be concerned about feeding mouths and other responsibilities that he needs to do. He can
Yeah.
focus on achieving and pursuing the goals that he really wants to.
Mhm.
Versus the person who is a borrower or servant has to keep these things in mind.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's going to do
Okay.
to fail.
Okay, what was that?
No lender plays in.
The lender is just the way in which
Lender's like not even the audience
Yeah.
of the pasuk. That's just the circumstances
the
under
lender
which.
can be a person or could not.
Right. The real people is the rich person, the poor person, and then the borrower,
You were just saying rich person.
Well,
and the
there's no
borrower.
or
person,
whatever, poor
person.
person. Yeah. No, I'm not convinced about that actually. That's why I went that way. Yeah, because I think that the poor person is better off than the borrower. You know, in a certain sense,
In a certain
it's a
sense,
trade-off. In other
yeah.
words, he's not bound by any restrictions. In fact, this is like why the big homelessness problem in certain cities in the United States, like Seattle and San Francisco, that are very rich, wealthy places. And one of the problems is that there are a bunch of people who would rather be poor and homeless because they don't want to be dependent on any of these societal machine or capitalism, right? The stuff. And so it is a trade-off. Like, you don't have a house, so you don't have to like pay rent or whatever. But yeah, I feel like there's more to say there. But then why did you were responding to what Isaac was saying, or you lit up because of
So
question on what Isaac was saying,
the sameach bechalko
Yeah.
component could be, and this doesn't necessarily need to be,
yeah,
but right, a person who is happy with what they have is
Yeah.
not constrained or is not limited by obligations to take in more than
Right.
he can actually sustain.
yeah,
Right. So a lot of times people want more than they can actually get.
yeah,
Right. And so then they're constantly pursuing something that's just not feasible for them.
Yeah.
And so that constrains them in a way in which a person who is richer, who is
Right.
sameach bechalko,
okay.
would not be able to.
So I see
Wouldn't be able to.
I see the overlap there. I want to just try a move of with Isaac is saying is that wealth and poverty, the currency we're dealing with is the currency of contentedness with what you have. So can we apply that currency to the metaphor of the borrower and the lender?
Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, in other words, a rich person rules over the poor. Rich means sameach b'chalko, poor means not sameach b'chalko. Ruling over means that you're going to be independent, and because your happiness is not dependent on externals. No matter what you have, you'll be happy. Whereas the poor person, the person who's not content with what he has, he could be very, very like financially rich, but if he can't be happy, so he's dependent on like sustaining that lifestyle or like other people approving of him or like being healthy,
Can you put it psychologically?
I thought that's what we were doing.
No,
Yeah.
a rich person has actually achieved a state of wealth. Right?
Okay.
Versus the poor person is in a framework where they're looking outside of themselves.
Yeah.
They're saying, look at this person, all he has, I want that.
Right.
And when they focus on being the other person, not finding out what they need for themselves, right? They're looking externally for what success is instead of what they themselves need. So then they are constrained, that person or that image of that rich person is going to rule over them. And that's the only path that they're going to be
Okay,
able to
I
take.
see that idea also as I'm seeing that as a as a component of Sameach B'Chalko, because I think Sameach B'Chalko also has to do with accepting the either accepting the current lot that you have in terms of your socioeconomic status, or not being bound by that, not even defining that as a category. Yeah, Chaim?
Yeah, I just want to tweak what Sean was saying on
Yeah.
the second half of the pasuk. It's like you were saying with someone who's not Sameach, then they're looking for other people's perspectives and then whatever the word. Yeah, I don't know, I forgot the word. They're looking for like other people's. I forgot. And basically, those people become the lenders to them, meaning they're like, I want your validation, thank you, like, and things like that, and therefore they'll do things to get that. But in reality, since it's not a real change in the person.
Oh, okay.
Therefore, it's just like they're borrowing that validation.
Right.
until the person,
Okay, that's good.
Walks away.
Right. That's okay.
And that way they're-
That's a really interesting idea. So there's like an artificial, like, vicarious Sameach B'Chalko of people who are looking to others to determine whether they should be happy with their lot. So it masquerades as like as Sameach B'Chalko, but it's not, because it's not actually coming from you, it's coming from the other person.
Right.
Yeah. Let's give an example of this. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you were happy and then someone points out like you shouldn't be happy with this, and you're like, oh, I'm not happy anymore, and you realize that, like, I mean, it's not always that this is the cause, but you realize that, like, you had your own standards, right, that you had met, right, and then someone else just says, oh, you should be doing more, or like, this is like inferior or whatever. Suddenly you borrow their standards without even realizing. Now that's the negative case of what you're talking about. People also do this in the positive case where they are like doing something that they're not happy with, but then someone who they look up to, or society or whatever, says like, oh, you're a success. And they're like, yeah, I am. And they convince themselves that they're happy, but they're really not. So that can only last for so long. So there's like so the essential idea is in the Sameach B'Chalko thing. And then the second half in the first half, and then the second half is warning you of a pitfall, like a counterfeit Sameach B'Chalko, where you think you're defining your happiness based on, you think you have the wealth, but you're really just borrowing it. That's good. That's good. All right, nice. Okay, should we look at some of Farshim in 6 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I kind of wanted to do I know we don't usually do the Meiri first, but I'm so curious as to what he says about the derech nistar that we have to. Okay, but we'll read the whole thing. Okay. Ashir barashim yimshol v'evelov ishmave. Ara hamonis. This is a like everyday insight. Leos halove mishabed atzmo avodas hamave. That the love should, I think he's saying should, subordinate himself to the service of the mave, of the lender. Lihis rapes elav, and to literally lihis rapes is to like soften himself before him. Leba'avur yigiehu ta'elas mimeno, so that he can derive benefit from him. What does this mean? I mean, what it sounds like he's saying is, let's say like I'm borrowing money from you, right? So there's going to be a tendency, because people don't like to be dependent, there's a tendency to like not want to cater to the source of your current money, right? Like I don't want to acknowledge the fact that I'm dependent on you, but really, if I do lean into that, I can get even more benefits from you. That's the thrust I'm getting from the
More benefits in what sense?
like there is I feel like there is a thing where like the benefactor does appreciate having his ego stroked, and will be willing to confer even more, more favors or more benefits or more like laxity in terms of different things on the person who's dependent on him. I want to try and come up with an example of this. Like, let me hold on a second here. I just want to make sure I'm reading he's raw base correctly. Re'el el vav gimel. Okay, that's going to be too much if he's talking about partios. He's raw base.
Isn't that to be like, be lax on yourself?
That's how I translated it now. I just want to double check though. like, I think it's like to ingratiate yourself. Hisra pace. Hisra pace is to bow and scrape. Okay, or kowtow is the yeah, right. Yeah, to like be subservient to like be yeah. Okay, well, let's read on and see if he clarifies. V'amar al ze tchila derech klal. First, it says in a general manner, she'ha'ashir yimshal barashim, that the rich person will rule over the poor. Koshkein kshiyagihu mimena toelas bilavoso mimeno. And all the more so when he derives a benefit from his borrowing from him. Therefore, he needs to recognize his elevated status. I'm losing myself in the pronouns here, who the he's are. Kamamar hachacham sheshaluhu, like the statement of the chacham when they asked him. So this is the mivhar pninim, the other mishlei. Mipnei ma hachachamim mashkimim lefiskei ha'ashirim. Why do the chachamim get up early to go to the gates of the rich? Vein ha'ashirim mashkimim lefiskei ha'chachamim. And the rich don't get up early to go to the gates of the chachamim. That's a good question. V'heshiv lahem. So he was answered. Mipnei ha'chachamim makirim ma'alas ha'osher, because the chachamim recognize the virtue of money. Vein ha'ashirim makirim ma'alas ha'chachma, and the wealthy do not recognize the virtue of chachma. I don't know what his point is.
I'm sure.
Yeah. All right. Let's put that in the back burner just because we really wanted to get to the derech nistar. With derech nistar, hakol ha'ara al shleimus midos. This is all insight into perfection of midos, which is the topic we were talking about last week. Bakara hina hayela hamiskein. It's calling the young, the poor youth ashir. Oh, it's calling him ashir. So this is your way. It's calling the chacham. It's calling the intellect rich, the rich guy. Lioso samech v'chalko. Oh, it's all of them together. Using my mashal and Isaac's interpretation of the thing, and you're plugging into the mashal. Yeah. Okay. This is totally an ego pleasure. We didn't know what he's saying. Yeah. Okay. But no, what it shows though is that all of our intuitions touched on something that at least has validity. You know, even if it's taking it a different direction. V'amar, and it's saying, Kishichanehu hakel lihis gaber ulahoti koha lafoal. When God is gracious to you, to allow you to overpower, I think, your Yetzer Hara, and to like enact your chachma in action. And I know he's not saying chachma, but that's the implication.
Like to do something.
Yeah. Well, lahoti koho lapoa. Koach means potential. Poa means actuality. So to actualize yourself. Okay, I'm just going to translate that for now, like that. Yimshol barashim. Then he will rule over the poor. Ratzlomer harodfim achara taivos avanim utzmeim. Okay, so that's like what Isaac was saying. That poor here is people who are not smech b'chalko. They chase after their taivos like people who are starving and thirsty. V'yachniim, and to subdue them, and to subdue them like the borrower is subdued to the lender. In other words, if you are not samech b'chalko, you're going to be subordinate to whatever it is that you're pursuing, right? To your taivos. Okay. V'yikre hateva hachumari hafyuni, and it's calling the physical heilig component. Okay, that's the Aristotelian term, meaning your physical body and psyche. Gamkein love. Ubilti nishlam, it's calling him a borrower and someone who's not perfected or not complete. V'husha amar David love rasha v'lo yishalim. The rasha borrows and does not pay. Ka'amru zal, and Chazal say echad love min ha'adam k'love min ha'makam. If you borrow from a person, it's like you're borrowing from God. Shekol mi shehu notel min acherim uma she'ino mechuvan lo nikra love. Anyone who who takes from others what is not intended for him is called a borrower. So what is he saying? So let's link up one thing. So he's saying that the subject is samech b'chalko, but he is putting it in terms of the intellect, right? That the intellect, by being samech b'chalko, can rule over the poor, and the poor are the people who are not samech b'chalko, who are going to be like servants to that which is lent to them, which doesn't actually belong to them, which is like these things they're pursuing. We feel like we need to work on this more. All right, so let's I'm gonna bleed editor look through the other mefarshim and see if we want to spend a third day on this or go into a different one for tomorrow. Okay, good. We got good ideas though, so I like we move on. I'm fine. Yeah. All right. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.